LiberalViewer presents.
So, a big thing that happened in the last week was the supposed end of U.S. combat operations in Afghanistan. And I want to show a couple clips from the NBC coverage. First, this long story about the end of the conflict, or the end of combat operations in Afghanistan, but saying multiple times that, and this was also in the intro to Meet the Press, where they talked about America being in an endless war, which isn't something you see talked about a lot on the corporate media, where a lot of their sponsors are the suppliers of the hardware for the endless war. But they did talk about it sort of at length over on NBC's Meet the Press, with Chuck Todd handing over to Richard Engel to give this extended report over in this clip.
Technically, U.S. combat operations did formally come to a close in Afghanistan in 2014. However, here are the facts. There are still going to be 11,000 American soldiers remaining in the country, just as chaos is beginning thanks to a resurgent Taliban. And there will soon be 3,000 American troops in Iraq, where the situation there is, if anything, bleaker, thanks to ISIS slaughtering thousands and controlling large swaths of that country, as well as Syria. So we asked our chief foreign correspondent, Richard Engel, to take a look at what appear to be wars now without an end.
ISIS now has a new kind of brutal propaganda tool. The group is asking for tips online on how it should murder a Jordanian pilot it captured in Syria last month, the first coalition pilot to be taken captive. Suggestions have been tragically pouring in, including impalement and burning him alive. ISIS hardly seems deterred by the U.S.-led war against it, now in its 7th month. 2014 was the year when old wounds and old wars in the Middle East many Americans hoped were over returned to center stage. Syria imploded, allowing ISIS to explode onto the scene. And Iraq, well, the U.S. is now back at war there, with around 3,000 troops on an increasingly dangerous training mission.
The Iraqi army came apart. 25% of it ran off and left their equipment. But it's hard to imagine a modest training mission being the key to gluing Iraq back together. I think it's come apart, and it will now have to settle along new geopolitical grounds.
The war in Afghanistan won't go away either. Last month, the president, in a very understated ceremony, announced the end of the combat mission there after 13 years. America's longest war ended with the faintest of whimpers.
We've been in continuous war now for almost 13 years, over 13 years, and next week we will be ending our combat mission in Afghanistan.
But the war isn't really ending, and military families will still have to keep giving. Around 10,000 U.S. troops will remain in Afghanistan to support local security forces. The mission's success is far from certain.
It's hard to imagine the Afghan army and police pulling together these disparate factions. So I think bad news in Afghanistan is what we ought to expect.
For the U.S. military, 2015 will focus on preventing old wars from getting even worse, which means those conflicts will continue to be a drain on American resources and perhaps a distraction from what could be the real security challenges, like Iran's nuclear program or cyber warfare. The U.S. now seems to be in a semi-permanent state of war, unable to break from the past. For Meet the Press, I'm Richard Engel.
So yeah, I thought that was pretty cool to have someone on the corporate media talk about America being trapped in an endless war. And they not only said that a couple times in the report, and like I said, it was in the intro to Meet the Press this morning, they also had on a couple guests to talk about why there had been this failure, including this retired general who wrote this book, General Daniel Bolger, who wrote a book, Why We Lost, about why we lost the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, which is also not something you hear people say a lot in the media, although I would like to point out, I put a link down in the video description to a video I made back in 2009 called Who Lost Afghanistan, where I was already talking back then about how we had lost that war. and it was not really, that was right when Obama was coming into office, when Obama ordered this surge of troops into Afghanistan, when I thought the war was already lost based on a lot of mistakes that were made back in the Bush administration, basically not on the military side, but on the governance side. And I actually had this NPR interview quoting this person from an NGO who was like helping out the humanitarian needs of the people in Afghanistan, named Sarah Chase. And she was one of the guests on NBC's Meet the Press, along with that retired general who wrote the book Why We Lost. And they both talked about why the military aspect isn't as important as putting together good governance. Over in this clip.
You, in your op-ed in the New York Times, said there needs to be an accounting of why we lost these wars. A 9/11 style commission that needs to be outside the military. And there's, of course, a cover story in the Atlantic Monthly I know you're very familiar with. Why do the best soldiers in the world keep losing? The tragic decline of the American military by, of course, Jim Fallows. I know you know this report very well. Is he right, by the way? Why do we have this incredible military that can't win these wars? What is your explanation for it?
I think Jim Fallows, unfortunately, is right on target. And I think the reality is the U.S. military is all about winning battles, but wars are an act of the entire country. And one of the challenges that we have, one of the reasons an accounting of these wars, as the president said, that we fought for more than 13 and a half years is in order, we have to determine what we're doing wrong that's preventing us from winning. In a military sense, Chuck, I could tell you, and Sarah referenced it when she said it, the military can give you a quick victory over a conventional army. It cannot deliver a rebuilt country in the place you go. That takes an effort of the entire U.S. population and government, and moreover, it takes the commitment of the American people for the long term. That's what Jim Fallows is getting at.
You know, Sarah, so what is going to be the solution next? We're just going to manage this, and then what? At what point do we walk away, or do we now just never walk away?
It becomes difficult to walk away because these situations are spinning quite badly out of control, and it's spreading. I mean, there is a theme in these conflicts that also crosses a number of other really serious security situations, which is acutely bad governance or even kleptocracy. You look at the Arab Spring, look at Nigeria, look at Central Asia, and these issues are not really being dealt with. They're being sort of relegated as we keep playing catch-up with sort of stopgap military approaches. And so it seems to me that if there really is going to be a way to address these issues, it's got to be the civilian components of U.S. government that really step up to the plate.
All right, Sarah Chase.
And yeah, that's what's really important that we didn't do, that we actually put these warlords in place in Afghanistan who were part of this kleptocracy that Sarah Chase is talking about in a broader sense. And I actually talk about this more in depth in my video, like I said, from 5 years ago, Who Lost Afghanistan? And I use clips of Sarah Chase.
First of all, we were the ones who basically brought President Karzai to the fore. So when he was elected, it was 2 years after he had already been in power. But part of why he was popular is because we were backing him, and the Afghans trusted us to bring them a properly functioning, responsive state, right? And then what they say, and this is what's really accurate, is we actually imposed a lot of these warlord governors who have become the problem. And I watched this happen in Kandahar, where President Karzai actually appointed somebody else to be governor of Kandahar, and we brought a different person in and imposed him, and we imposed him by force of arms. And I saw us doing this time and time again. We were using these warlords as our proxies in the fight against al-Qaeda, and we put them in positions of political power, and then we never, ever paid any attention to how they treated their population, to the point where I saw the guy that we imposed as governor of Kandahar, he had his own private militia. And that private militia was wearing U.S. Army fatigues, and they were abusing the population from the get-go. They were stealing stuff from people, they were kidnapping people, they were beating people up, they were doing whatever they wanted, and we never discipline them in any way. And so the Afghans' answer to your point is, you know what? These are your dogs. You brought them here. it's up to you to bring them to heel. And once you bring them to heel a little bit so that they're not such a danger to us, then we, the Afghan population, can reassert our own control. But right now, the deck is too heavily stacked against us for us to be able to retake control of this situation.
I also noticed there's a Bill Maher clip in that video.
Obama sending 17,000 troops to Afghanistan. You know, is it really going to make a difference? Are we really going to pull that one out? You know, that they play soccer with human heads. You know, I don't know if they're, you know, it's bad to say they're not ready for freedom or that, but you know what? Maybe they're not. Maybe they're not ready.
Where I criticized Bill Maher for being too harsh on the culture of the people of Afghanistan, where Bill Maher says, oh, well, maybe they're not ready for democracy. They like play soccer with human heads or something like that. And that's not the problem at all. It's not that they don't want to be free. It's that we impose these warlords on them who even Hamid Karzai didn't choose. And Hamid Karzai wasn't the best choice, I don't think, either. And so I actually thought that the Chuck Todd and Richard Engel reports on the endless war that continues after the end of combat operations in Afghanistan, I thought were informative and left me feeling like I had thought about the problem again in a new way. And they also, like I said, reminded me of that old video I made back in 2009. But you can let me know what you think down in the comments section about the endless war and the end of combat operations in Afghanistan that haven't really ended combat. So let me know what you think. Is the lack of stable democracy following U.S. invasions more the fault of U.S. policy or the indigenous population? And on the title question of the video, is America losing its endless war?
YouTube, you decide.